open letter to Uncle Sam. Love you, man. Here's the thing, Uncle Sam. Do we agree that satellite countries have to be accommodating to their centers of gravity? Satellite countries, satellite nations should be accommodating to the center of their gravity. So what I'm referring to is through the center of the gravity that is holding them together. It's called satellite country, satellite nation, satellite, a satellite. And the difference is in the difference in weight that they carry. And, as per nature, whatever, as per, astronomy, whatever carries a lot of weight becomes the center, and those who carry less weight become its satellites. Now, the question is, and it does make sense, as per universe works like that, and, the atoms also work based on the same principle. So from the big to the small, everything works on the basic principle of, the bigger one is the center of gravity, and then, the smaller ones become, sort of have to be accommodating the center of gravity, and their policies should be aligned. And that is exactly what is seen and expected with regards to Canada and Mexico, and all of those other little shed holes down there, and all the shed holes in the Atlantic Ocean, in the Caribbean area. They all have to be somewhat accommodating to the center of gravity, which is the United States, which is Uncle Sam's land. Now the point is this. This we understand. Yes, we understand. This is the center of gravity here, and there are these satellites. Now, if we do understand these satellites that somehow have to accommodate the wants and needs of the center of gravity, we do understand this in the Americas, in specifically North Americas and Central Americas. But then we don't recognize that in other places in the world that there are other centers of gravity, and we regard as the countries that are around them don't really have to be accommodating to them. They can be accommodating to us. They don't need satellites. They got their own place, and they don't need satellites. In fact, we're going to have their satellites be more accommodating to us than to their center of gravity. I'm talking about, China. China, is the center of gravity here because, they have held together. A large number of people have held together for a long time. And, so this is the center of gravity. It has moons that surround him. Those are the smaller states made of other ethnicities, branches of probably the same line, and with different regional languages here and there, and different regional dialects here and there. But it's natural to expect to see that these satellite states, are accommodating to their center of gravity. That's natural. That is what natural is all about. Nature is all about the center of gravity and the accommodating smaller satellites around it. So why don't we, when it comes to this situation of, China, we say that, okay, no, Taiwan can go their own way. They can be accommodating to us. They can be our friend. They don't have to be friends with the center of gravity that's 1 billion people sitting next door. They don't have to be accommodating to them at all, or in line with their policies. No need for that. We got you. Well, would it be acceptable that, the Chinese decided to make really good friends with around us? It would be unacceptable. I mean, Cuba has been sitting in the corner for committing such a mistake of trying to be more accommodating to, the foreigners than the hemispheres, the people in the same hemisphere, to, Uncle Sam. So they've been sitting in a corner because of that. Because, they stepped out of line. That's exactly, how the Chinese feel towards, South Korea and Taiwan. Is sort of like, this is, your presence from your hemisphere, from your race, interfering in the local matter, which is, of course, these motherfuckers have to be accommodating of our needs because, we are the center of power here. I mean, no matter how genius the Japanese are, it's just the numbers don't add up. So even the Japanese have to be to some degree accommodating to the center of gravity, which is China, its human resource and its bulk numbers and its, whatever else they can muster together. But the point is this: you have to allow, flexibility so the wheels over there can turn. The only way the wheels over there turn is if they turn around China. The satellites, there are satellites of China. So in order to, have peace, they have to be accommodating to their own center of gravity. I mean, it just makes sense. You can imagine it as all these gears that are, rotating. You have one large gear that is rotating, and you have these smaller gears that are, in a corner attached to this larger gear. They're all around these. When the larger wheel turns, those other wheels around it, they're also turning, but their turn is, related to the rotation of the large wheel. And that's how you get harmony. But by saying that, no, a couple of these wheels, smaller wheels over here, are not going to turn the way the large wheel wants them to turn. In fact, they're going to turn opposite. So therefore, it's conflict of gears. Literally, it's a conflict of gears. But the bigger gear is in, because it's not the job of the bigger gear to turn and accommodate the smaller gears. It's the job of the smaller gears to turn in a way to accommodate the larger gear, the center of gravity. So by saying no, any cocksucker can declare independence, and anybody, we back anybody's independence. Do you back Texans' independence? No, it's unacceptable. It's sort of like, here's the thing about independence. I mean, You can call it independence. You know, my 10-year-old kid, your 10-year-old kid might consider himself as independent from you, but you know, and has grown to make his own decisions. But as long as, you know, they are within your jurisdictions, they're your problems. So the point is this. I mean, anybody can declare that they're independent and they are, you know, it's not like that. Here's what I'm trying to say. For example, take a look at a country called Kuwait. Kuwait was not on the maps 100 years ago. 100 years ago, you bring the historical maps, and Kuwait was not there. Kuwait came into being after World War One. The Europeans basically, you know, smashed the Asian Ottoman Empire and broke it to little pieces that they could agree on, the British and the French. Again, this is Middle East has been divided by the pink skins idea of what is what the lines of division should be. 100 years ago, there was no country called Iraq. It was all part of the Ottoman Empire. You know, Syria or you know, Saudi Arabia or Saudi. All of these came into being, and Kuwait. All of these turned to be, you know, came into being after the outsiders from Europe, you know, came in, won a war, and then decided that we won a war, but we want to break up these motherfuckers that, you know, lost the war to us. Because breaking up makes each individual piece weaker. Smaller place, weaker, better, more influenced from the outside, because smaller places cannot defend themselves from the outside influence. You're small, you need to trade, you need to eat, you're not big enough. Russia can be under sanctions for 1,000 years. It's big enough for its people to feed themselves, more or less, with mechanized systems, of course. But the point is this: you can break into 1,000 pieces, but all have independence. But look, for example, what has happened to Kuwait. Kuwait did not exist 100 years ago, as we said, and it was created by the British, and it's such a small place that it will always desires the British protection. And British, of course, you know, are very good friends with Uncle Sam. So through marriage and family, Uncle Sam is basically the protector of the Kuwait. And what is Kuwait? It was a piece of property that, you know, was designed by the British, just given independence. You're independent. So the British have given independence to a couple of tribes that were living over there. These tribes could have been living in, you know, in Colombia, and you know, you just cut a piece out and say, oh, you're independent. From tomorrow you can call yourself Nolombia. They were Colombia and this is Nolombia. So when the Europeans decided to you know, invent these countries, drew some line over some fucking map and said, from now on, you sheikh, you answer to me, and the other sheikh answers to me for that area, and this sheikh answers to me from this area, and now here are the keys. From now on, you're a country. So when you design a small country like that, when you're the British and you design a small country like that, what you expect the country to be is your base, because you know the size of a country is, and its lack of identity is going to cause some problems. Is going to cause some problems in the future, because the country is made up with no identity, and it's very I want to say badly designed. This, whoever came up with the map of the Middle East, the British and the French that came up with the map of the Middle East, they designed some, really interesting. First of all, they've given too much too many countries to too many people. You don't need all these little shitty holes around the Persian Gulf. They don't have enough difference from each other to actually be different countries. It's a fucking different tribes of different tribes, around this dead end of a Persian Gulf. You don't need so many little shitholes, so many little countries. And the problem with so many little countries is like this, is that forever these little countries need British protection. They've been created by the British, and the whole system is British, and they look up to the British. They used to be a colony, and now they look up to the British. I mean, that's why they're all driving Bentleys and Rolls Royces, because they look up to the British. And the point is this, and where to take the money? Of course, to the British. Go fighting my shoe is out of question. So the point is this: you have the country designed and executed by the British called Kuwait, or Libya. I'm sorry, Kuwait, or even on that side, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and then you have a few more of these little, UAE and Qatar and Oman and they fucking took a little island off of Iran, and they named it, they gave it statehood. Who decide these motherfuckers should be states? And Bahrain is literally an island. It's a very small island. Its name is always, is never written on that piece, because, the name is going to cover more area than the land. You would never recognize that, that one island between those 100 islands, that's a new country. Who designed this? Somebody who wanted to have a foot in the area. Hey, you're independent from now on, but you see all these big penises around, these bigger countries. No, you want to be independent, therefore, and you have the right to be independent, therefore I'm going to put half of my army here and half of my navy here to protect your independence, because your independence is very important. There are 100 fucking shitty little islands. They all, do you really want to live in a world of 5,000 countries? They're all little shitty independent shitholes. And, they all, rotate around London. This is the center of the world. And you guys, they keep rotating around London. That's the point. Do we want such a world? Okay, even if we want such a world, why go through it with war? because it's more productive, because it's more profitable, because and the point of these little countries is that London always has to provide protection for them, and London doesn't have much, so London is counting on this side of the pond for protection. So basically, it used to be the British Empire. Now it's the North Atlantic Empire. Basically, all the old little colonies that the British had created, mothered, birthed, all the little shithole colonies now are the property that needs protection, and well, and these numbers keep rising. They all need protection because you're telling them you don't have to follow your center of gravity. Why they all need protection? You have created all these small countries, but fine. You have created all these small countries, fine. But what you need to do to tell these smaller countries that yes, it may be a good idea you follow your center of gravity, wherever you're located, whoever is the bigger dick in the neighborhood, try to work with them. Anything short of invasion, anything that prevents people getting killed. And that means, we shouldn't kill the most ourselves. And anything that keeps order and less people get killed. Tell them have less kids, but don't kill the ones that have already come into this planet. So the point is this: you have created these small satellite states that, for example, around the Gulf, the ones with the ones that historically have had, a noticeable presence, the ones that historically have had a noticeable presence are the Iranians. Now you're telling, you have brought a cog, a wheel of yourself, that is, Israel. You have brought that wheel from Europe, that satellite, that small satellite of 5, 6, 7 million people. You have brought people from Europe and filled into that satellite, and you're saying that the rest of the Middle East should rotate around this satellite. Even the big boys on the block, such as Iraq and Iran now, they should rotate around this small satellite, this Europeans, this group of Europeans that have landed in Israel, in the Middle East. They're Europeans. Let's not beat around the bush. For many times now, I have looked it up on Wikipedia, and internet in general is obvious. It's in the statistics that like 80% of the Jewish folks, which I love, are of Ashkenazi origin, and Ashkenazis are European identity, European ethnicity, from around, I guess, Ukraine and upper into Germany and north into Germany, and that area, around couple of rivers. This group of folks decided to keep with the old tradition, old Bible, and so, but ethnically, maybe at the beginning they had some male introduction of male DNA from that area of earth, which is Palestine, Israel, whatever, the Holy Land. In that, from that Holy Land, maybe a group of males have gone over there and mixed with the locals. Maybe that's the case. That's fine, but we are all from somewhere. So just because for example, I set an example and said uh, all the migration from the primitive forms of life to humans, all the migrations that humans did out of Africa, the Homo sapiens and the Neanderthals and Homo erectus and whatever else we don't know about, all these motherfuckers eventually made their way out of Africa. So they all have passed over first Cairo in Africa. They have all passed through there, and then on the Asian side, the first place that is not a desert and you can settle down and maybe have a cold drink is that area, right where the Holy Land is. That's the first stop out of Africa if you're going by land. So it's obvious that we can all claim that land because at least one ancestor of ours has passed through that land. Anybody living outside of Africa can claim the Holy Land as a rest stop to his ancestor. So many of them probably stayed there for a long time before they headed out north or west into Europe or east into Asia. It just makes sense. So we all can have a claim on that. And bringing a bunch of European, 80%. So the math is simple. 80% of the world's Jewish population are Ashkenazis, and Ashkenazis are European. They are a European, ancestry. So fine, okay. So basically, Europeans have come over here, 80%, like 1% Ethiopians. But the point is this: is 80% European. These 80% population who are Europeans, specifically, brought over from all over Russia and Germany and Poland, all over, but European. They're all pink skins. So you put them down in the corner of Asia, and then we tell everybody else in this shithole, all in all these shitholes that we made up ourselves. We drew the lines. The British fucking gave Iraq to Iraqis. The Kuwait cut the tip off Iraq and call it Kuwait. So the point is this: this is all made up. These guys are all made up. These countries were all made up by the British. And they all kind of need, if they want to stay independent, they need protection. But the point is this, expecting the bigger ones in the neighborhood to be accommodating to the smaller ones is unnatural. And the answer is not let's break up the bigger one. That's the answer of the British are hoping that they can break up Iran to 12 pieces, so they'll all be small, so they all would be easier to accommodate. They will be more accommodating to the smaller one. So you want the smaller ones, such as Israel, be the center of gravity in the Middle East. That's why the conflict. That's why the conflict, because this fucking thing is trying to rotate the bigger bulk of this population, which are Middle Eastern, happen to be of certain religion, very territorial. You want them to be accommodating to a small group of Europeans who just landed. This is exactly the problem was in Africa, South Africa. The problem you have put down some settlers of European descent. European people come down, put down some settlers, And now you want South Africa, the smaller settlers, rule the place, and they just push the locals into little enclosures and, watch them. And then you expect the other countries in Africa around there to become satellites of this European center, which was South Africa. And you build the industry very well, gave them a lot of advantage, treat them like brothers, and they came up. Eventually the locals, have the tendency to grow on you. And this is what happened. Eventually the flora and fauna grew over the settlers. So here's the thing. I mean, it's unnatural to expect smaller, to expect bigger areas of land, bigger populations who, identify with each other. You cannot expect those, more historical population. Iran has been Iran for a long time. Yeah, there are different races in it, but where the fuck can you find pure races? Iran, but the identity of Iranians have been Iranian for a long time. Yeah, some of them, have their mother tongue has a different tinge to it, but they more or less have had the same identity. And a lot of other ex-Soviet states identify more with their Iranian side still after 70 years of Soviet Union. After 50 years of Soviet Union, they still more identify with the Iranians than with anybody else. Than their own Soviet heritage. So it's an idea, the whole, culture-wise, idea-wise, and, whatever culture is. So the point is this: you have a big population who have a commonality. You expect the bigger center of gravity to be accommodating to what? 5 million, 8 million, 10 million European settlers. That's why out the conflict. You are working against what is natural. The smaller one be accommodating to the bigger ones. It's not natural to break the harmony of the region and divide Arabian Peninsula into 50 different pieces and give every tribe over there is independent. If you want to go that route, that Arabian and every tribe should have their own independent, you can break up the Arabian Peninsula to a couple of hundred countries, new countries. Everybody, if the idea is everybody should have independence and every little tribe should have be independent, you don't need to have Kuwait. Just Kuwait. Just Kuwait can be broken up to 3 countries because there are 3 different tribes, distinct tribes, as far as distinct goes on this planet. That's Kuwait. I mean, you can have 100 different tribes in Saudi Arabia, 40 different tribes in Saudi Arabia that they want to be independent. Shall they? Here's what has happened with Kuwait. Kuwait was, first of all, an old civilization. People who are living in that old civilization of Mesopotamia should not be fucked with, because not out of fear but out of respect. These people are the guys who they can follow their roots down here to 100,000 years ago, 300,000 years ago. The roots go down really deep here because of a lot of wars that happens on top of it. it's difficult to find those routes because a lot of destruction has happened. But you know that this area is, right out of Africa towards Asia is the Middle East. And you know Neanderthals walked over this. You know Homo sapiens, of course, did. You know Homo erectus walked over this going east. So, chasing the sun. But the point is this. It's sacred land. It's enough blood has been shed on it. There should be a moratorium on blood shedding on that land. So the idea is the smaller ones should be more accommodating to the bigger ones in the geography. If you don't want conflict, Ukraine should be accommodating to Russia. Just accommodating. It's sort of like, nobody from outside brings them into their camp and said, no, you're with us now. And we're gonna put some guns in your country, aim it at the other guy. It's sort of like, so you think you're such a center of gravity that, even the satellites of these other centers of gravity have to gravitate towards you. Enforcement of such an idea may lead to nuclear war. Enforcement of the idea that no, the smaller countries, even the smaller countries near you, should turn with us, should go to party with us. We have, South Korea. The idea is not South Korea is successful because it's capitalist. No, the idea that South successful, Burma is also capitalist. Why South Korea? It's because South Korea is getting so many freebies from, the NATO. South Korea has free access to markets in NATO, but North Korea is banned from access to even normal markets, even Asian markets. They confiscate North Korean ships. They're not. South Korea can export everywhere and North Korea can export nowhere, and then you're wondering why North Koreans are hungry? And their form of government has to be what? Their form of government? Do they have order? They're doing fine. You can send tourists. Even if a couple of them come back dead, it's okay. The casualties of tourism is always less than casualties of war. Again, anybody who says anything about tourism, just remind them that casualties of tourism are always less, in many orders of magnitude. The casualties of tourism is much less than war. You can influence them with tourists. But the point was this, that Kuwait, this country of 4 or 5 million, if you look at it in the map, Iraq is a landlocked country. Iraq is a landlocked country. The worst country to be in is a landlocked country. Why? Because landlocked country tend to become very poor. One of the reasons Afghanistan is so backwards is because it's a landlocked country. You shall not have landlocked countries, because those countries, those territories, will have a very difficult time exporting, importing, they have to pay higher taxes, their prices are always higher, life is going to be more difficult in those areas. Now we have air travel, but still, you know, it's not, air travel is not as cheap as, you know, travel by road or train. And products, most of the product has to be transported via train. Your export, if you have anything for export, it has to be transported by train. And neighbors will charge you for just allowing your product to reach warm waters. So in their wisdom, the British decided to, create a landlocked country by the name of Iraq. It's landlocked. I mean, it's only access to warm waters is through a river. It's sort of like it's a river. Imagine all the land, all the area, and why is that? Is because they cut Kuwait out of Iraq. It's a piece of land that sits between Iraq and the Persian Gulf, the warm waters. And it has a port, it has many ports and blah blah blah. The area of land between a landlocked nation and warm waters, that area of land, that small area of land, has been given independence by the British. Now tell me that this was for good intentions. Tell me that the British had good intentions by creating a country called Kuwait, just out of thin air. Literally squeeze the neck of people of Mesopotamia. People who live there, I don't know, they're all cocksuckers anyway. But the point is this, the choking of trying to choke the oldest civilization on the planet. The British have tried by creating Kuwait. The British have choked or choking the biggest civilization on the planet. The oldest, one of the oldest civilizations on the planet. The people of Mesopotamia, which Iraq is the heart of it. Why would you do that? Why would Kuwait want to be independent? They're a couple of tribes, no different than those other tribes next door who are part of a larger community. I mean, you don't think Saudi Arabia has 100 tribes that they all want to be independent? I'm sure they do. They all want to be independent. I mean, if the British are willing to give, warranties of defense, they all want to be independent. Let's cut off Saudi Arabia to 100 little countries. Is it logical? So the point is this. Kuwait is sitting right between Iraq and warm waters. The problem again with these landlocked countries is that they're all backwards. Mongolia, landlocked country. Afghanistan, landlocked country. Iraq, landlocked country. No access to warm waters. And the result is these countries are going to stay very backward. They don't have access to warm waters. They can't do much trade, They can't do, much tourism. They can't do much trade because, if you don't have access, if there is no access to ocean, you don't even have a couple of ports, ocean ports. How the fuck you're going to trade? Who you're going to trade with? you're going to have to pay the Kuwaitis every time a ship arrives because it has to pass over their territory. It has to be with their permission and with their taxes. And they are under the defense of the British. So that means if the Iraqis want anything to travel from the ocean to their area to eat, the British have to okay it, because it has to pass through the territory that they are protecting, called Kuwait. So the point is this: the British are literally sitting in Kuwait, protecting Kuwait's independence. Like Kuwait is identified with, understand the concept of country. Defending their independence, but in actual fact, whatever Kuwaitis let pass through Kuwait between Iraq and the ocean, has to be okayed by Kuwaitis, which, okay whatever the British okay. Again, and because these territories, these small territories, because of the British, you expect the Iraqis to rotate around the center of gravity of Kuwait, because Kuwait is under your protection, under the British protection. Therefore, the bigger population of Iraq has to be accommodating to the smaller population of Kuwait. Does it make sense? And this is why we had these conflicts. Because it doesn't make sense. Now you're telling the Iranians that they should be accommodating to the center of gravity that is Israel. And by no measure one can say that you're going against nature. You expect a bigger population. Forget about even countries, bigger populations with much deeper roots than these European folks, these honorable European folks. These guys have had much deeper roots. The Europeans are claiming very deep roots. We are the lost tribes of Israel, and we're gathering back here. Yeah, but I can show you much deeper roots. We can go all the way to the Neanderthals. Our ancestors, they all passed over that land at one time or another, lived on that land on one time or another. All of us who are not African can claim this, because it's the first pit stop right in Asia, right out of Africa. You pass the Suez Canal and you pass the fucking desert, the Sinai desert, and then the first habitable place on the Asian side is by the Mediterranean, east side of Mediterranean. That is the Holy Land. So everybody can claim it. Everybody who's not African. But should we go to war on it? And should you expect these new settlers from Europe? Should you expect the rest of the Middle East to be accommodating to their needs? Accommodating to their security needs? Accommodating to get permission from them to, if they want to do anything or say anything? You're going against nature. And that's why the conflict. Center of gravity is one, and then smaller ones become satellites of the center of gravity. If you try to oppose that and say, no, those smaller countries around these big countries, they can be loyal to me, they don't need to be accommodating to their center of gravity. There goes Russia, there goes China, there goes Iran, there goes, India. Never mind them. Germany. Germany is the center of gravity. And, and European Union makes everybody recognize that, okay, this is the center of gravity, this is where everything is built. The rest of the, countries around Germany, around Europe, have to be more or less accommodating to the Germans. And there go Brexit. What this cog, this wheel, this, this gear that is fucking British, they don't want to rotate around the bigger center of gravity that is Germany. They don't want to do that. And all the whole conflict within Europe has been this simple. The British do not recognize the might of Russia, and they don't want to be a smaller satellite around the bigger center of gravity. Size-wise, technological-wise, how to do-wise, the Russians have always been better than the British. Have always been better. The British, though, the only thing the British all their lives is like their aggressiveness, and even they didn't even invent most of their navies. Whatever they use in navy, the British have, adapted the invention of the Belgians and the French, and they're much. Basically, it goes back to the Germans. The British have always been good at stealing German technology through other European countries. But once they get that technology, the British always use that technology to attack the mainlanders, the Germans and the Russians, because it's the small gear that does not wants to do its own thing, does not want to accommodate the centers of gravity in Europe, which is Germany and Russia. They don't want to be accommodating to neither one, and there go. You have these wars. Can it be done? Sort of the British, the gear that around Europe, next to Europe, that doesn't want to be accommodating to the Europeans, wants to be accommodating to Uncle Sam. Taiwan in East decided that they don't want to be accommodating to their center of gravity, which is China, wants to be more accommodating to Uncle Sam. And Cuba, which is, wants to do its own thing, doesn't want to be, should be the, accommodating gear to the center of gravity, which is Uncle Sam, but they don't, so therefore they're in the penalty box for 70 years now. So the same goes everywhere. And even Uncle Sam, the same way that the Chinese are treating the Taiwanese, Uncle Sam is treating the Cubans even worse. The Cuban people who live there, who happen to be living under that system, and Uncle Sam doesn't treat. Uncle Sam's managers, they don't treat Haitians any better, although they're not communists, and Grenadians neither. And many of these poor shitholes were, training grounds for a lot of, soldiers of managers of Uncle Sam. But the point is this, that it's all understood that every time every one of these small shitholes around in the Caribbean decided to get out of line, i.e. not be accommodating to the center of gravity, which is United States, these shitholes, got a slap. Their leader was removed, so they understand that they're the smaller gear, which has to be accommodating to the mother gear that is Uncle Sam's business. But should we recognize the same idea for the Chinese, for the Russians? So without any invasion, so without actually going into war, we recognize the same rights that everybody wants to have the same rights. Everybody wants to have the same rights. If you understand the concept of being the center of gravity and the smaller ones around you have to accommodate you, you should understand that if there are other centers of gravity, you should allow the smaller gears around them to be accommodating to them if you don't want war. I.e., let the Taiwanese and even Japanese be on friendly terms, and the South Koreans be on friendly terms with China, because that's their center of gravity. And allow these little shitholes. Don't insist on them being on you being their center of gravity from across the planet, but allow a regional guy like the Iranians be their center of gravity, and they have to accommodate them. And not only you don't do that, you don't let the other people in the Middle East be accommodating to their center of gravity, the biggest one with the biggest population, with the most history. I'm not talking about Saudi Arabia. Again, Saudi Arabia is not a center of gravity in the Middle East. Yes, they put the fucking Kaaba over there, but the thing with Saudi Arabia is that Saudi Arabia is a made-up country. It has no deep roots over there. There are no roots over there. There are no trees over there. It's a collection of tribes that the British were able to put together. Again, at the end of World War I, these tribes were put together and called, and one of the tribes were chosen as their leadership tribe, and now the leadership tribe has a king and has been ruling that shithole for 70 years. But it was built by the British. Saudi Arabia has no identity. Iranians have been called Iran for the past 5,000 years. A combination between Iran, Persia, Iraq, Arya, Irya, Orija, Paria, Puria, Persia, Pariana, Poruna, a combination of any of these has been called something similar for the past fucking 100,000 years. And you know that because of all the mythology that is involved with its history. You know that shit must be very old. So the point is this. You cannot expect the Iranians, with such a long, deep history in that area of this planet, the bigger gear in the Middle East, you can't expect that bigger gear to be accommodating to the smaller gears. Accommodating securely in security matters, because here's the thing. What you're saying is that Iranians should not be armed, but the Israelis should be armed. It's sort of saying that the bigger kid in the block, with the largest population, with the largest, deepest root, the biggest kid in the block should not have a penis. But the smallest kid in the block should have a 2-foot penis. This is what you're saying. It's like the smallest kid in the block, the newest kid, the freshest kid, right out of the clinic. It was born, the Holy Land, let's call it Israel, and the littlest kids, the youngest kids should have the biggest penis, and the oldest kid, the old man of the tribe, the Iranians with the long deep roots, they should not have a penis. No arms, no nuclear, no non-nuclear, no weapons, no You should cut your penis off. You can do that, but it won't. Nothing makes sense. But that's why all this war going on, these skirmishes and all people dying, is because you're expecting the bigger guys to accommodate the little guy. And when the Saddam did not accept accommodating Israel, and he lobbed a couple of missiles at the European settlers over there, you said no, they got to go, and you got rid of them, rid of the whole structure. You wanted the structure to be destroyed. Why? They had a structure going on. It's a fucking shithole. They're gonna kill each other if you remove the structure. And that's exactly what they did. You have kept them as a shithole by giving their only access to warm waters independence. You expected Iraq to be a shithole because you made it a landlocked nation. My cocksucking British friends. You may make it you have the opportunity to create a nation, you make it a landlocked one? Really? That's, I want to say pernicious. That's very pernicious. That's very unkind of the British to try to keep the people of Mesopotamia forever under their thumb by landlocking them, by giving independence to Kuwait, and therefore landlocking Iraq, turning Iraq into a landlocked nation, one of the oldest civilizations on earth. And then when the guy goes in and says, okay, no, we don't want to be landlocked anymore, we want to have access to water, Kuwait is part of Iraq. No, we can't have that. We're gonna go free Kuwait. Free Kuwait from what? Free Kuwait from what? It's a piece of geography in that area that they're all tribes, that they're all trying to survive, and they need to eat. There is a big bulk of population behind this small piece of geography that is Kuwait, that this bulk of population will have more to say in the world stage if they had, what we should give them, access to warm waters. You have taken one of the oldest civilization on earth and you have made it into a landlocked nation. And if they try not to be landlocked and take what is naturally theirs, part of their land, that group of people that are living over there, you can't divide them up into by arbitrary lines. This is what I'm saying. You cannot divide the people who are there by arbitrary lines. And no, more arbitrary lines are not better, because this is what it does. Arbitrary lines keeps people backwards, because it turns them into landlocked nations. Afghanistan should not be Afghanistan, should not even be independent, should not be a country, because it's a landlocked nation, and that's why it's been backwards since it has been landlocked. Afghanistan was fine as long as it was part of the neighboring countries. Most of it belongs to Iran. But if it was part of Iran, it would have, I can assure you, it would have been much more forwards. Because, Central Power was able to spend the energy to keep order even in parts of Afghanistan. Just like they're doing their best to keep order in, Balochistan and whatever. It would be difficult, would be expensive, but you want to keep the unity. You have given the responsibility of keeping order over this area of land. So my point is this: not only the British created Afghanistan, the British also created Iraq. If you didn't know, Afghanistan is also a creation of the British. There was no country called Afghanistan, no country called Pakistan, no country, called India was not really one entity. And India was a couple of hundred entities. The British put them together, try to form a country, because India has like 13, 14, 15 different official languages. They will never have a united history. Every village has its own god and god, a favorite god and goddesses. If anybody, if you are giving independence to Kuwait, every state in India should be independent. If independence is good, great, every state in India should be independent. Does anybody want to advocate for that? By just the existence of Kuwait shows the deep hate that the British have for and contempt that the British have for the rest of the world, in trying to keep them back, because they know landlocked countries don't do well. They know sanctions and embargoes are tools of war. They are a kind of war. So the point is this, that either get rid of the borders, or understand that if there are satellites, there are smaller countries around bigger countries, bigger populations, then these smaller countries have to be accommodating to their center of gravity. Either remove Kuwait from statehood and add that area to Iraq, logically, very in a humanly fashion. Because right now, here's the thing: Kuwait. How did the British use Kuwait? How they used it is, Kuwait is making a lot more money, has too much income per capita, because of it has a small land, but it has an ocean of oil under it. So, and very small population. So, a lot of surplus income means that the second biggest investor in the biggest corporation in the world, which is BlackRock, the second biggest investor in BlackRock is Kuwait. Just Kuwait. The country of Kuwait, the island of Kuwait, that little, piece of Iraq that has been cut off like a foreskin from a penis, that piece is the second biggest investor in the biggest corporation in the world that owns everything. Has a piece of ownership of almost everything. Look it up. BlackRock. We're talking about, at this point, like trillions. So the point is this: not only they have, by separation of Kuwait, they have basically cut Iraq's penis off, and Iraq, the oldest civilization on earth in Mesopotamia, does not have access to free water, to warm waters, so therefore they're landlocked. Their only access to warm waters is through a river, and not a very deep river. So not only they have been landlocked, but also they're expected to be accommodating to a smaller gear, a smaller wheel in the system, which is Israel. And since they weren't accommodating, they got smashed up. And you know, please don't tell me Iraq is doing better now that it was under Saddam, because even now, 20 years later, still Iraq is not doing better than when it was under Saddam, because there's still Kurdish people are immigrating out of Kurdistan. Kurdistan is one of the better looking Iraqi provinces that is semi-independent, I guess, but it's one of the better ones. Least amount of fighting took place in Kurdistan, and they came pretty much clean out of this deal. And still, people are dying in boats trying to illegally immigrate within Europe. I mean, people still running away from that area of the planet, going to another area of the planet, hoping for a better life, because their own area was just invaded by some guys who didn't like the boss, who couldn't cut a deal with the boss. I'm sorry, folks. It's just at this point, I don't know what to say. You're making the rules as you're going around, and all the rules always have to be accommodating to you, and screw the rest. Eventually it's going to cause war. I mean, that's just simple. You need to allow the smaller satellites in other places to be more accommodating to their own center of gravity. You shouldn't expect them to be accommodating to you. They have their own center of gravity.